Early Mormons practice polygamy or plural marriage, but they may not know much about it. They may be afraid to ask questions. So let's start with an overview. When did plural marriage start in the church, and how long did it last?
Plural marriage started with Joseph Smith and lasted for about 50 years until the end of the 19th century.
And how many people roughly were involved?
It varied quite a bit over time. In the early period when Joseph was introducing polygamy, by the time he died, it was a very small group, maybe 100 people that were involved with plural marriage. A couple of decades later, when it was at its height during the Utah period, estimates are that maybe 50% of the membership of the church in Utah was involved in plural marriage in one form or another, as a wife, as a husband, as a child. By the time President Woodruff announces the manifesto in 1890, the practice was already declining quite a bit. And from there, it declined quite a bit and just kind of faded out as the generation that had been involved passed on.
Over time, many people have associated plural marriage more with Brigham Young, the church's second prophet, than with Joseph Smith. Why is that?
I think it's because Joseph Smith introduced the practice very quietly and very gradually and among a very small group of people in Nauvoo. And it wasn't until the saints got to Utah that Brigham Young publicly announced and acknowledged the practice of polygamy.
What can you tell us about Joseph Smith and the beginnings of plural marriage? Where did the idea come from?
We know that Joseph received a revelation while he was working on the inspired revision or translation of the Bible, very soon after the church was organized, based on questions that he had about the Old Testament and the practice of polygamy or plural marriage among the patriarchs. He began introducing the practice of plural marriage when the saints were in Nauvoo, and he said that he had been commanded multiple times that it was time for that practice to be implemented and restored among the Latter-day Saints. In general, when he taught the principle to someone, he invited them, encouraged them to pray about it, to receive their own witness and confirmation. And while most of the people who he taught plural marriage to during this period initially were very shocked and maybe even resistant, we also have many accounts of men and women receiving manifestations, receiving testimonies for themselves that this was something that they should do.
So it's introduced confidentially, and Joseph invites people to seek their own spiritual confirmation before entering the practice. How does the experience of living in a plural marriage change once the saints come to Utah?
The biggest change is probably with the growth of